The most acclaimed Bond game may be returning. The internet is abuzz with news that one of the most influential console first-person shooters may be getting a modern-day port. For Xbox gamers who like tracking their Xbox game achievements, there's a site known as True Achievements which people use to see what achievements they have and what achievements they're missing for any game. And True Achievements just updated their site with a list of Goldeneye achievements for the Xbox One. No one is 100% sure, but based on the achievement list, it looks like it's going to be a port of the original game. The naming of the levels, difficulties, and weapons mentioned in the achievements list hint at it being a port or remaster rather than a remake of the original N64 classic. The original game was a cultural phenomenon when it came out. Any kid or teen growing up back then who had an N64 probably had it, and if they didn't, they probably knew someone who did, and you could be sure that they were all playing some split screen goodness back then. There were a lot of developers who took a stab at the 007 license after Goldeneye. There were games like Nightfire and Agent Under Fire, and while those were decent shooters, they never felt as fun to play as the N64 Bond game. And there were also games like From Russia with Love and Everything or Nothing, but those games didn't even have like first-person shooting, so they were third-person shooters. The gaming developer Eurocom also took a decent shot at reimagining the N64 classic as a Wii game, but it was more of a remake rather than a remaster or port. And while it was decently received from gamers and reviewers alike, the publishers all know that more people wanted a port of the original, warts and all. And let's make it clear, the original game doesn't hold up as well as most people remember, but it's still a fun game to revisit, especially if you grew up with it. Visuals aside, the controls are what are the most unreliable part today. We've all grown up over these last 2 decades with the advancements and refinement of controls in FPS gaming on consoles, and the way the controls were designed for the N64 Classic feel a lot different compared to modern shooters. That being said, Rare got a lot right back then, and for most people willing to accept the limitations that were placed on the aiming back then, they will still find a game that is extremely fun to play today. And if we do see this port happen, I hope that Nintendo is also getting it and not just Xbox. And I also hope that if it comes to Switch, they also allow the new Bluetooth N64 controller to be used, so we can relive those janky controls with the original analog stick that it was designed for. I do think that we can make it work well with a regular controller as well, and probably make it feel better than the N64 controller ever could. The video on screen right now is of Perfect Dark's 360 port, which is probably the closest feeling thing to Goldeneye because Rare themselves also made it. Rare at the time squeezed out an amazing campaign that had multiple unique objectives that changed depending on the difficulty you selected. This was the same for Goldeneye and for Perfect Dark. It's something that unfortunately never really caught on for gaming at large. However, when most of Rare left to form another studio called Free Radical, they did apply a lot of these principles to Time Splitters as well, which is another successor to Goldeneye. What you see here is footage of Time Splitters 2 running in BC mode. And while it's a completely different game, I think this is sort of a visual benchmark of what we can kind of expect from the Goldeneye port. A big part of what made the original game so great was its split-screen multiplayer. We got a ton of FPS games today, but not all of them offer a compelling couch multiplayer experience. Most shooters today are designed with a minimum of 4v4 in mind for their maps, and as a result, it's not as fun to play with just 4 people in the same room, unless you're filling the game with a bunch of online players. I hope that they keep the ability to run Goldeneye in both split screen as well as online, similar to the Perfect Dark 360 port. I think the dream would be to have the game running at a constant 60 FPS and allow crossplay between Xbox and Switch users. And hopefully Sony users can also have access to the game as well. Even though the Switch has significantly less power than any of the modern consoles, it's still more than enough to get a solid 720p 60 FPS experience out of the Goldeneye port. I honestly think that we can probably expect it to be in 1080p if it does come to Switch. Also, the image quality boost that we would likely see would help it look so much better, and the frame rate boost will help it run just like how it should have been in the first place. The original game ran in the teens, like 12 to 15 FPS, and while it was fine back then, it's not an experience that most gamers want to experience now. Perfect Dark's 360 port really set a benchmark, and it feels silky smooth even today, and it's hard to go back to now how the original Perfect Dark felt, and I'm assuming that's how people want Goldeneye to feel as well. Both games were pushing the N64 as hard as they could, as you can tell from this old Goldeneye footage. And Perfect Dark actually ran worse than Goldeneye did, which is why I have high hopes for its Goldeneye port. I don't think the game will necessarily be a hit with everyone who hasn't experienced it, and I'm sure many people who enjoyed it before won't enjoy it now. But I think the game's heritage deserves to be remembered, and a modern port like this will remind people of where the console FPS gaming got its first big boost and how far we've come from the foundation that Rare was setting way back in 1997. Here's to hoping Goldeneye's port will be amazing, and cheers to seeing how it turns out.